So if, like me, you find yourself marvelling at natural history programmes but wondering why nobody mentions the plants, then you've come to the right place, because today we're taking a look at a terrific book which redresses the balance. Plants are so often thought of as the background to the real wildlife, the forests merely the place where the animals live, but this book turns that on its head and says that no, the plants came first, and rather than them being just a habitat or an environment for animals to use, it's actually the plants that's driving things. It's the plants that have used the animals for millennia in ways that are as sneaky and ingenious as they are enthralling. And this is a short look into Stefano Mancuso's The Incredible Journey of Plants. And we are in. Okay, so a book review is a departure from my usual video content, but why not? I might do some more. So first of all, it's not going to really be a thorough, detailed book review. I'm simply going to tempt you with a few of the many fascinating stories in this wonderful book, and I know that you as plant lovers will get a kick out of some of these stories. Of course, if the stories pique your curiosity, you can always go and look it up and send for your own copy to get the full experience. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that plants don't actually move very much, but you'd be very wrong. Consider, for example, that in 1963 an underwater volcanic eruption took place off the coast of Iceland, resulting in a brand new island named Surtsey. Now, as you can imagine, after only recently emerging from inside the earth as molten rock, the place was completely barren, devoid of life for a matter of weeks. Very shortly afterwards, an Arctic flower began to appear. That was followed by a black sedge, and soon the whole island was covered in mosses and lichens, and today there are even shrubs there. And that's despite only scientists being allowed to land ashore, and even they are systematically checked that they're not carrying any seeds or any other life because they don't want to spoil the habitat. How? Well, the flower was called cacile, which evolved to spread its seeds on ocean currents. Now, I'm sure you kind of had an idea about that. The sedge travel through migrating birds, but this is just one example because plants have evolved to colonize practically every place on the earth, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains to the driest deserts. So each story gets a little bit more wow. Let's have a look at number 2. Okay, so we're talking about plants colonizing the whole world, and we're even going to talk about how resistant they are to things like radiation from a nuclear bomb. We discovered this through the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 and the World War II detonations in Japan. So Japan even has a name for trees that survive the 10,000 degree Fahrenheit blasts. Hibakujimoku, I think that's right. One weeping willow still grows today just 1,200 feet from the centre of the blast in Hiroshima. Obviously the top growth went, but the bottom growth was able to survive that blast, which is something like 100 times hotter than the sun, and it recovered and it regrew. Number 3. So let's take a look at some surprising plants that have spread themselves around the globe. So let's imagine you're sitting down to a classically Italian meal of pasta and ragu sauce, a tomatoey sauce, or maybe a margherita pizza. Nothing could be more authentically Italian, right? But wait, the basil on the pizza originally comes from central India. It was brought by Alexander the Great back in the 350s BCE. Now the question in my mind was it his decision to bring it back, or is it the basil, the taste of the basil, that's enticed him to bring it back? Interesting question. But still looking at our Italian meal, the tomatoes. They're not Italian. The tomatoes came somewhat later from the Americas via the explorer Hernan Cortes in 1540. Loads of examples like this. Potatoes in the UK. What could be more British? Well, no, they're not actually British at all. They came back with one of the great explorers. Let's look at story number 4. Another surprising example of plant spreading is the so-called Oxford Ragwort, known to have originally colonised the area of Oxford here in England, but now all over the UK. It's a typically English wildflower, you might think. Well, would you be surprised to know that its natural habitat was the rocky slopes of Mount Etna in Italy, one of the most famous and active volcanoes in the world? It arrived in England in the 1700s. It was actually a gift from an Italian botanist to an English botanist at Oxford University. It escaped Oxford's botanical gardens and quickly colonised the whole of Oxford, but it wasn't finished yet. I think it's a really fine coincidence that during the Industrial Revolution then, about that time, hundreds of miles of railway track were marching across the British countryside. In fact, one of my ancestors, my granddad and my great-granddad, both worked on the railways. And the bed of rock that they laid the tracks on just happened to be remarkably similar to the rocky slopes of Mount Etna. So as the railway lines spread out, so did the ragwort, and it took full advantage and spread right across the countryside. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't recognise the ragworts with the yellow flowers. But the story doesn't actually end there. I'll let you read that one for yourselves. Other plants with superpowers for travelling great distances include the coconut, which is a native of Asia. The hollow husks are adapted to be able to float on the seas for up to 4 months at a time, allowing it to colonise even the remotest reaches of the tropical and subtropical world. Now, I think we're at number 5. Another less known but equally incredible adaptation of some plants is their ability to survive for quite mind-boggling lengths of time. Consider Auguste Renoir, the Impressionist painter, who enjoyed painting local olive trees in the 1900s. Well, those very same olive trees are still alive today, well over 120 years later. Impressive? Well, that's just scratching the surface. There is a spruce tree in Norway known as Old Chico that dates back, wait for it, over 9,000 years. This has been verified by carbon dating of the root material. Well, how does it last so long? How does it live so long? Well, the photos that you can see, the trunk part is probably only a few centuries old. What happens, and plant people will be familiar with this, it layers itself. So any part of the plant that touches the ground forms a new root and a new trunk. And in that way, it can march across the countryside, constantly layering itself, consistently reproducing itself, and in that way it creates all these clones, and it becomes like a single organism, and it can spread quite a way. In fact, in Utah in the USA, there is a colony of identical poplar trees called Pando. They have a name for it. It's classified as a single living organism, and it dates back, wait for it, 80,000 years. 80,000 years. This colony spans over 100 acres and is estimated to weigh over 6 million kilograms. So this stand of poplars has also reproduced by layering. Incredible. One single organism over 100 acres. So seeds too have been known to germinate and produce living plants despite being locked in permafrost for nearly 40,000 years. I think TV documentaries very often fail to demonstrate how closely dependent on each other plants and animals are. Sure, we're told plants are necessary for food and habitat, but the intimate relationship between them often goes unsaid. So I was talking about the relationship between plants and animals and how close it is. So I want you to consider the avocado tree. Who's never had avocado? I'm sure most people have. Would it surprise you to know that if it wasn't for humans taking a fancy to the avocado flesh, the species would be extinct? Well, that's because the fruit and the large stone in the centre has evolved to be a tasty snack for sloths and mammoths, or giant sloths I should say, and mammoths. Now, of course, they are both extinct, so when your primary consumer and spreader of your seeds itself becomes extinct, well, there's not much hope for you unless another species comes along and takes over that role. So if it wasn't for humans cultivating them for food, they would be no more. So these are just a few of the amazing stories in this book, and I encourage anyone who's interested to pick up their own copy, as my telling of it probably isn't anywhere near as good as the authors. Let me know what you think about these stories, and if you enjoyed me dipping my toe into the world of book reviews. But before you go, there is something that I discovered relatively recently that enables you to read more books in less time, and I cover it in the video up there, and I think it's probably number 4 or number 5 on the list of 5 more pieces of tech that massively improve my life. So go watch that. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.